Welcome to Daily Life Connection, as we continue to explore who God is through the story of Jesus told in Luke chapter 15. Years ago, there was an old TV show, and I think it was called What's My Line? And somebody would come on, and the panel would try and guess who they are or what they did or whatever. What's my line? What's my story? And I want to talk about that today in the context of this story about the prodigal son. In this story, the young boy comes back home and he goes, "This is who I am. What's my line? I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I'm unworthy. Maybe if you could just make me a hired hand." His story about himself was one of failure and guilt and shame and loss and condemnation. That's his story about himself. But the father doesn't even let him finish his story. The father says to him, "Let me tell you who you are. Let me tell you my story about who you are." And what the father says to him is, "You are my son. You are blessed. You are welcomed. You are cherished. You are loved. You are of value to me. I love you. I want you close to me. I want you to join me in my celebration." That's who you really are. That's your real identity. That's the real story about who you are. We go way back in Genesis chapter 28 or 32. It is when Jacob wrestles with God. I think it's 32. And, in the middle of it, he's wrestling with God, and God says to him, "What's your name? Who are you?" God says basically to Jacob, "What's your story?" And he says, "My name is Jacob." That which meant deceiver. I'm a con man. And God said, No. Let me tell you who you are. You are Israel. You are a prince of God. Wow. God said, "I'm going to turn your whole story on its head. I'm going to remind you that your story about yourself is not true. It's a false story. My story about you is who you really are. It's the real story of your value and who you are in this creation and in this whole grand scheme of things." You see, the enemy loves to attack our identity, doesn't he? Oh man, for all of us, all through our childhood and adulthood and however old we may be, the enemy has constantly brought lies into our lives about how we're of no value, we're guilty, we're shameful, we're losers, we never will get anything right, we're stupid. Just all those stories, we're sick, we're guilty, we're an addict, all those labels come on us, and we embrace them. And we say, "This is who I am. This is my story." We write them in our autobiography. This is who I am. And in this story, Jesus is saying to us, will you stop that? That's not who you are. Your real identity is who Abba says you are. And Abba says you are a child. You are a son. You are a daughter. That's who you really are. You are loved and cherished and blessed and welcome here in this place. You are of value to me. That's who you really are. You see, his self-identifying words were negative and derogatory and accusatory. Whenever you label yourself, whenever we label ourselves with words that are negative and accusatory and derogatory and full of condemnation, whenever we label ourselves, loser, failure, those kinds of things, stupid, when we label ourselves like that, I'm going to be strong here. Stop talking like the enemy. That's the enemy's voice. He is the accuser of the brethren. Stop embracing his lies about you and repeating them and embracing them. Let's today make a determination in our hearts. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to listen to Abba's story about us. And we are blessed, we are healed, we are whole, we are delivered, we are his righteousness, we are the children of God, we are heirs, we are full of his glory. Let's start believing those words about us. We are special, we're unique, we're God's masterpiece, Ephesians chapter 2. God has created us and loves us and makes us unique and blesses us. Let's start embracing those words about ourselves. Let's start believing God's story about ourselves and stop agreeing with the enemy. Let's start trusting that God knows what he's talking about. Can we do that? Can we begin to trust that God knows what he's talking about when he defines you and I, when he describes us, when he tells us his story about who we are? Wow. Some stuff to think about today, isn't it? I don't know, it might even be a good little exercise. Take a piece of paper out and write down, this is who I am. And just write down a whole bunch of stuff. And then look back over it and see how much of it is in agreement with what the enemy says about you, and how much of it is in agreement with what God says about you. Now, I know after listening to this, you're going to start trying to describe yourself in positive terms, but I'm talking about describe yourself as you thought about yourself yesterday. Go back through yesterday and describe yourself about how you did things and who you were yesterday, and see whether it agrees with God or the enemy. Let's start to rethink this. Let's repent and begin to embrace God's story about us. Some stuff to think about. We'll talk again tomorrow.